Hello, hello, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. Happy Labor Day to everybody out there celebrating their 3-day and in some instances 4-day weekends. Hopefully, everybody got some sun, got some pool time while before it closes, and getting ready for the start of hockey season because we are about a week away from the beginning of Penguins prospect camp, which also includes a little friendly game between the Pittsburgh Penguins prospects and the Boston Bruins prospects in the Prospect Challenge up in Buffalo, New York. And we're about 2 weeks away from the opening of Pittsburgh Penguins training camp, which means preseason games are coming. And we're a little over a month away from the start of the NHL regular season. Horwat, hockey is on its way back, and it's a great feeling.
We're getting there. Things are ramping up, like we mentioned. The Prospect Challenge game's coming up. The training camp is soon to follow that immediately. This is the exciting time, and also I got zero sun this weekend because it rained the entire time. So happy Labor Day weekend, everybody. I also work today, so things happen.
Yeah, we're both on that train, both having some work things to get done today, but at least we get to start the day off here at the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, talking Pittsburgh Penguins. And let's lead it off with this subject because this is the final, I believe, and you mentioned that they might do just a top 20 players list for NHL Network, but we've been discussing this every Monday for the past 3 weeks. This week it was the goaltenders, and there's nobody from the Pittsburgh Penguins on the top 10 goaltenders list from NHL Network. Tristan Jarry was left off the list. And instead of him, we'll go down through it right now. The list includes number 10, Marc-Andre Fleury, number 9, Jake Ottinger, Freddie Anderson at 8, Connor Hellebuyck at 7, Thatcher Demko at 6, Ilya Sorokin at 5, Markstrom at 4, Saros at 3, Igor Shesterkin at 2, and Andrei Vasilevsky in his normal spot as the number 1 goaltender in the National Hockey League. Horwat, what do you think of this list? And do you think that Tristan Jarry should have been included in the top 10 goalies?
I think this list is a sham. Honestly, it's so wild. I mean, is like the first thing that jumps out to me is UC Saros up that high. This is his first good season to really, be the starter for the Nashville Predators, and they bumped him up immediately to number 3 in the league, ahead of Jacob Markstrom, who had like 10 shutouts in the first month of the season. Incredible, apparently. Ilya Sorokin, who, I mean, that's a number 5. At number 5 for a very not good Islanders team. Sure, roll with it, I guess. Thatcher Demko, also a question mark. I mean, he had his first good season, and again, giving him all of the praise. Jake Ottinger, fine. I'll let him sit there because he had a stellar postseason, but this is nutty. And Tristan Jarry absolutely got snubbed, in my opinion. Absolutely. I mean, we've been talking with people that have said definitely top 10, definitely top 5 even from a few people. So this is shocking, honestly.
Yeah, when I look at this list,
sorry, not to cut you, but who were the top 3? I forget who the top 3 were for Vezina voting. Vasilevsky,
Shesterkin and Saros.
Saros. Okay. I thought Anderson was in there, but yeah, still wild.
Yeah, when I look at this list, I agree with the top 5, especially, Vasilevsky and Shesterkin are far and away the best 2 goaltenders in the National Hockey League. Saros, what he was able to do last season for the Nashville Predators, he basically carried them into the postseason, and they might have put up a better fight against the Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche if he was available to them, but he wasn't, and things didn't go well for them. Markstrom, like you mentioned, had like 10 shutouts in the first 2 months of the season last year. He had a great year. Sorokin, I agree with as well. I think the Islanders, just because of their bad season, not a lot of people are giving the Islanders credit for some of their good performances. Barzal came around in the second half of the season, was a little bit better, even though he started off so poorly, just like the rest of the team did. But Sorokin was their rock last year. He was one of the reasons why in the second half of the season, the Islanders became such a force. So I don't mind the top 5 here. The back half is where I have issues. Marc-Andre Fleury at number 10. Would I put him in over Tristan Jarry? Not heading into this season. And that's what it is. It's top 10 goalies heading into next season.
Yeah.
And Fleury was great last year for the Blackhawks. He was one of the few shining stars for that team. He was really good when he came over to the Minnesota Wild. I think he's right around this area. But again, I would put Tristan Jarry in over him. Ottinger, I don't want to see in the top 10 here. I think this is 100% increased because of that playoff performance. And he's still, when you look at his numbers from last year, he did not perform like that throughout the whole season. And I understand perform when it matters, and that's important. But heading into this season, I don't see Jake Ottinger as the number 9 goaltender in the National Hockey League. Freddie Anderson, I think, should have been bumped up a little bit from number 8. I think a big issue for that is the fact that he was injured for the postseason. Connor Hellebuyck had an awful season last year. And so did Thatcher. Like Thatcher Demko and Connor Hellebuyck, they were average goaltenders last year on way below average teams, yet they're still 6 and 7 here. Like they were the best part of their teams. I'll grant you that, but there should not be ranked 6 and 7 respectively in this list. So I personally think that I would have ranked, if looking at this, I would have put Tristan Jarry at number 7, number 8. I'd have Freddie Anderson probably at 6. I'd have probably Tristan Jarry right after that, and then Marc-Andre Fleury next to him there. Like I don't think Ottinger, Hellebuyck, or Demko deserve to be on this list more so than a guy like Tristan Jarry. And you could just look at his stats for reason why. Last season, Tristan Jarry was 34, 18, and 6. Had a 242 goals allowed average, which was good for 6th in the NHL. Had a 919 save percentage, which was good for 6th in the NHL. Had 11.97 goals saved above average, which is good for 8th in the NHL. So you were top 10 in all of those very important categories. Yet you're not ranked a top 10 goaltender heading into the 2022-23 season. I agree with you that the fact that Jarry's not in it is kind of a sham. And I also think the 6 through 10 spots are completely wrong. But I will say at least the top 5 they got right.
I still have issue with the top 5. I just don't like Sorokin being up that high. That just seems really high to me.
I would put him up even higher, honestly, but I'm fine with him at 5. I would say he could be number 3, to be honest.
It's just interesting because it seemed like how they've been running this list is top goalies, like you mentioned, top players by their position right now and going into next season. Why wouldn't, Tristan Jarry be on here? Why would he be behind Thatcher Demko at least? He had one good season. That doesn't mean it's going to last.
Mm-hmm.
Just based on based on trends. We know how goalies are.
Mm-hmm.
He could absolutely fall apart. He's also not. He's on a very unstable Vancouver Canucks team. But also, your thoughts on Hellebuyck are much lower than I think because just looking at the numbers, yeah, the Jets weren't all that great, but he also played 66 games.
Yeah.
Going for 29 wins, 27 losses, and 10 ties. For what it's worth, though, looking around the rest of the league, Sergei Bobrovsky is not on this list, and he tied Vasilevsky for most wins for the season with 39.
Yeah, he was carried by the best offensive team we've seen in 2 decades.
Then you know what? Maybe that's what takes down Jarry because maybe, again, all these national pundits go, well, their goalie, like Fleury had to deal with for years, is being carried by these great forwards that are going to score in front of him.
Yeah, but also, I think when you look at Bobrovsky, there were games that he absolutely lost for the Florida Panthers because he gave in 6 goals, and the Panthers would win games 7-5. There's no way that you can allow Bobrovsky to be in the top 10, especially whenever the Panthers are looking at it like, when is Spencer Knight going to eventually take over? Like Spencer Knight, if he was better last season, would have started way more games for the Florida Panthers, but he just didn't take advantage of the opportunity because Bobrovsky was not, and we saw it when the Penguins played the Panthers last season. Bobrovsky was not solid. So I agree with him not being on this list as well.
It's fair. He had 7 losses, though. It was 39-7.
Okay, and Louis Domingue was what, 21-5 with the Tampa Bay Lightning in their historic season? That doesn't mean Louis Domingue was a good goaltender. That means he was carried by one of the best teams in hockey.
No, but he was also very clear the backup. If you are taking also one of the benefits this list has over like award voting is the retrospect of the playoffs. Mm-hmm. They can take that into account. We can see that Vasilevsky for the 3rd year in a row took the Lightning to the finals. We can see that Igor Shesterkin was able to battle against the Penguins despite not being the better goalie into the second round and then to the 3rd. If I'm remembering correctly, my brain's a little foggy.
Mm-hmm.
UC Saros, he got the team to the playoffs.
Yeah.
David Markstrom, a hell of a start to the season. That's all you really need. Sorokin, we're not talking about. Demko, we're not talking about. Hellebuyck, Anderson made it past the first round. He's
He was
someone.
he was injured.
Oh, he was.
Yeah.
Was he here? Jake Ottinger had that absolutely stellar first round despite losing.
Mhm.
You have the retrospective of the playoffs to have this list and put together as well. So maybe Jarry being injured, like you mentioned, I mean Anderson's still there. it's it's talking in circles here at this point because we're all very confused and are looking for reasons why he's not on here
Mhm.
because he should be, and I think we can all agree with that. Um, but they have the way to look at postseason success as well. Jari played one game in a period and lost.
Yeah.
Takes away from it. Did it injured, no less. Maybe they're taking in the fact that he hasn't been healthy for two straight postseasons, or yeah, and are struggling.
Yeah, well, when I look at this list, only 5 of these 10 goaltenders played in the playoffs last year. The other 5 did not. And when you look at the 5 that did play, Vasilevsky and Shesterkin were both very good in their first and second. Jacob Markstrom was crap in that second round series against the Edmonton Oilers. He single-handedly cost the Calgary Flames that series because he was so beyond bad. He was almost Tristan Jarry levels of bad when Jarry played against the New York Islanders. Marc-Andre Fleury was trash for the Minnesota Wild in the playoffs. Jake Ottinger was great in the playoffs, but I just think this is a list that is just so faulted that you cannot put any actual thought process behind it. Like there was no thought process in this. It was throw out a top 10 list to generate discussion. And that's what it did, obviously, as we're talking about it. But like a Jake Ottinger, I know people will push back because what have you done for me lately? He was fantastic for the Dallas Stars the last time we saw him. But if you look at his regular season, he finished just over Casey DeSmith in goals saved above average. That's where he finished in the regular
Mhm.
season, and one of the most important stats a goaltender can have in goals saved above average. So I do think that Tristan Jarry was snubbed from this list. I don't think at the end of the day it means very much of anything. Maybe it's bulletin board material for Jarry. Doesn't seem like he's a guy that uses stuff like that, but it's something for him to use. Like I said, I would have put him at either the 7, 6, 7, or 8 spot on this list over guys like Thatcher Demko, over a guy like Connor Hellebuyck, because we don't know if he's able to do what he can on that Winnipeg Jets roster. Maybe if he's on a different team, over a guy like Jake Ottinger, and maybe even over a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury. I wouldn't put him over Anderson, but like I said earlier, probably 7, 6, 7, or 8 right behind Freddie Anderson.
And this is why it's a team sport, right?
Yeah.
It is all about the team you have in front of you. It is not just your how skilled you are. Whereas, yes, some of these goalies can absolutely step in and carry teams one way or the other and make differences in games and victories. But this is why it is a team sport and that we don't look at these lists wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still fun to talk about, sure. And you want to have your players on this list. That's why we keep talking about it every week. That
Yeah.
hey, a new NHL Network list came out. Cool. Which Penguins are on it? Well, not Jarry this time, so we're a little baffled by it.
Yeah, I was just in shock when you sent it to me because I was like, I really figured, especially because it seemed like NHL Network talks up Tristan Jarry a lot. I figured that he would be in the top 10 list, but maybe leaving him off is something that's going to leave an open block in their show today to be able to talk about.
Yeah. Also, I keep missing these when they come out. I guess I haven't watched the whole video on it, but so be it.
I always completely forget because they come out on a Sunday night at like 9 or 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
So
They're just putting it out at the wrong time. They're not hyping this up enough.
yeah. Well, either way, we just still discussed it, and looking at Tristan Jarry, there's not much room to improve on his regular season last year. Stay healthy. That's the
Mhm.
important thing. But 242 goals allowed average, 6th in the NHL. There's room to improve, but not too much. 919 save percentage. Jarry was up around 930 at points throughout last season. He did have a little bit of a rough stretch later into the year that brought him down to 919, but still a very good save percentage there for Tristan Jarry. And 11.97 goals saved above average. He was up over 30 at one point, or 20, I should say, not 30. He didn't get the 30. That was Igor Shesterkin and his ridiculousness last year. But there was a long time where Tristan Jarry was second, third in the National Hockey League in goals saved above average. There's room for him to improve heading into a contract season, and we've talked about that, and we'll be talking about that as a major storyline for him throughout this season. But if he can play the way that he played last year and stay healthy for the postseason, and of course, that is an entirely different animal that we don't need to get into right now, is his performance in the playoffs. He's gonna sign a 4-year, 5-year deal worth, if you're lucky in the Penguins, for $5-6 million, maybe $7 million.
Yeah, yeah. He has the opportunity to absolutely cash out if he has a great season this year. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not saying turn into another Matt Murray where you get your big contract and then that's it, wrap it up. But
Mhm.
he is he has a great opportunity to really prove what he is, and that is part of the reason why I think this team should wrap him up sooner rather than later, before he can do things like that. Depending also on what the player and agent want to do.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
just my opinion of it.
Yeah, we haven't heard a single thing out of either camp about potential Tristan Jarry contract extensions. We know Ron Hextall has been asked about it most recently on 93.7 The Fan, and he basically said that he trusts his goaltender and said nothing in the terms of where they're at on contract negotiations or even if they're having contract negotiations. So we'll have to keep an eye out for that.
You also have to figure he Ron Hextall and Brian Burke took up until after the draft, day before the draft, to get the two big horses signed this past offseason. So you never we don't know how they are with signing contracts midseason yet, really.
Yeah, they have handed out smaller contracts midseason. Obviously, Mark Friedman got a 2-year deal. Radim Zahorna, I believe, was extended midseason, and so was Chad Ruhwedel. So we'll have to see what they do as far as Tristan Jarry. As far as I'm concerned, you sign him because the goaltenders that play the way that he plays and that could carry the load that he carried last season are few and far between in today's NHL, and you need to get that under contract. The playoffs thing is still a worry, but you still need a goaltender to get you there in the regular season, and Tristan Jarry is more than capable of doing so. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the takes of a former Pittsburgh Penguin, a 2009 Stanley Cup champion. We'll discuss that here on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. Horwat, Tyler Kennedy is one of the more vocal former Penguins, at least on social media. He likes to give his opinion. He likes to obviously do everything he's doing in the Pittsburgh area with the TK Learn to Play program. Very great for the environment and for what am I looking for? He's good. He's good for the city of Pittsburgh, right?
Good for the game.
He's giving back
Yeah.
in Western Pennsylvania, which is nice. But he went out and put about a 2-minute video that was absolutely loaded with hot takes last week. And let's start with probably the biggest thing that he said and the most fabric thing that he said, which was Evgeny Malkin is going to be a monster this season. And as far as to saying that he's going to lead the Penguins in points, interesting take. If he can stay healthy, he'll lead the Penguins in points. What do you think of that take? Like, do you think that there is a way that Gino leads this team in points? We had this discussion a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month and a half ago, about way too early Penn's predictions, and we'll come to a different one and see if we change that a little closer to the season. But neither of us had Evgeny Malkin leading the Penguins in points. TK does. What do you think of that?
I think it's an interesting an interesting little take because Tyler Kennedy, I think he's done these videos before and has always spoken pretty highly of Evgeny Malkin.
Yeah, his former line mate.
Former line mate. A lot of Evgeny Malkin's former teammates or line mates even do speak extremely highly of him. They see his work ethic no matter what no matter what the situation is, whether it be an injury or now a COVID season. We've seen a huge amount of work ethic from Evgeny Malkin that he wouldn't be surprised, that Tyler Kennedy wouldn't be surprised to see something like this because he knows Malkin sees what people say. He knows that Malkin is going to come into the season healthy and motivated with a new contract. And, maybe some of those things we heard from reporters that the contract negotiations got personal, got weird, maybe got bad. He's going to come in and try and prove to not only the fans that have called him out, not only yeah, not only the fans have called him out, but also the his own front office that may
Mm.
have toyed with him a little with this new contract. He's going to try and play above a $6.1 million clip. So who knows? I mean, if he is that driven and that motivated, I think we can all agree that anything is possible with Malkin. Again, I don't know about leading the team in points, but that's a hell of a take. And from someone who has been in the room with him, I'll take that opinion at least a little higher than what a lot of people will say, because when you are a player as well, you do learn other things. You do
Mhm.
know these guys differently. Now it's been a while since TK's played with Malkin, but
Yeah.
uh, it's Evgeny Malkin. Odds are he's the almost the exact same person, really.
Yeah, and it's not like anybody's saying, at least on this podcast, that Evgeny Malkin's not gonna have a good season. I'm very bullish on the fact that I think Evgeny Malkin's gonna have a fantastic season, but I still don't believe he's going to outscore a guy like Sidney Crosby. I don't know if he's gonna outscore a guy like Jake Gensel. I do think he'll be in the top 3. I think he'll finish right there at 3rd.
Hmm.
And let's be clear, because you mentioned it very slightly, and I didn't mention it, and I should have. Tyler Kennedy said he would not be surprised. He didn't come out and say Evgeny Malkin will lead the Penguins in points. He said he wouldn't be surprised if Evgeny Malkin went out there and led the Penguins in points if he can stay healthy, which has been a
Hmm.
big thing for Evgeny Malkin. And I'll continue to say it because we mentioned it when we were talking about who's going to lead the Penguins in goals, which is who I said will be Evgeny Malkin. It is, yeah, he could play the whole season and he will have a great season, probably score over 85 points. People will think of him in an entirely new light. But if he doesn't, I'm not going to be that upset. If he's healthy for the playoffs, I don't care if he plays 50 games. Be ready for the playoffs. Be ready to make an impact in the playoffs and be 100%, maybe not 100%. Nobody's ever really 100% after an 82 game regular season, unless they don't play any of them, Nikita Kucherov in 2019. But honestly, if he's able to be ready for the postseason, able to make an impact in the postseason, I don't care if he plays 50 games in the regular season. That's just something that I'm going to hold true the entire way through, especially if he gets injured. But he's heading into the year without an injury, didn't have to rehab this summer. I can see where TK is coming from, but
Hmm.
I still think if Malkin plays all games and Crosby plays all games, which first and foremost would be fantastic for the Penguins, but if both of them play all games, I do think that Sidney Crosby is still going to outperform and outpace him when it comes to total points.
Most likely, yeah. It's fun to really have this discussion and think about it, because we know Evgeny Malkin's going to be driven, and
Mhm.
we'll take, like I said, I'll take the word from someone who played, on his line and shared a locker room with him. It's Those are some thoughts and opinions that deserve to be heard, especially in a situation like this,
Mhm.
because it was. I mean, let's be real. The Malkin Letang, those questions were the biggest questions for the Penguins this offseason, is what to do with them. Now
Mhm.
they're here. Not that we're stuck with them, but they're here. Now they have to perform, and at least someone thinks they're going to.
Mhm. Now, that wasn't the only thing that he said in his fun 2-minute little rundown of the Pittsburgh Penguins 2022-23 season. He also looked into the future for the Pittsburgh Penguins and kind of gave off the impression that he doesn't believe that Brian Rust and Jake Gensel will be able to lead this team to the promised land following the Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang era. He doesn't believe that those guys could lead a team to the playoffs, could lead a team specifically to Stanley Cup championship victory. What do you think about that take from TK? And do you believe in Rust and Gensel more so than TK does?
So I thought this take was a little more outrageous than the Malkin one. I personally, because
Hmm.
we're looking at me and you at bare minimum look at Gensel and Rust as a pair of guys that can, not for a super long time, but can be the leaders of this team in the post Crosby Malkin Letang era.
Hmm.
We believe that those two, at least, and maybe a couple other people, maybe we don't have them yet, can be the main core going forward. I mean, I've discussed the idea of Gensel and Rust staying Penguins for their whole careers,
Hmm.
because that seems to be the big trend in sports these days. I'm gonna loft the idea out there that Brian Rust could be the future captain of this team. Not so much Jake Gensel, because we were told a long time ago that it might not be him. Hell, we were told it could be John Marino. We see how that's gone. But Brian Rust, because we've seen the organization put a lot of faith in him. 6
Hmm.
more years, that at a time when I was fully ready to give him up to keep around a guy like Evgeny Malkin. and keep around a guy like Chris Letang. But they said, no, he is priority number one. And we didn't know that. Brian Burke said he was priority number one before the veterans that have been here. So they want to keep Brian Rust around. He just strikes me more. There's no other facet to this than just the fact that he strikes me more as a leader, that he could be the next captain after Sidney Crosby, depending we don't get any other obvious captains to grow up into this team. So I could see those two being the future, as if they carry us into the promised land, as TK called it. I think they could. They just have to have the right players around them still. It is, like we mentioned with the goalie thing, it is a team game. It isn't just these two. Sidney Crosby was the right leader to lead the Penguins in 2009, to lead them in 16, 17. But he had other guys with him. We know it wasn't just Sidney Crosby. I mean, Evgeny Malkin took those playoffs over in 2009. In 16, 17, it took the whole team both times. I mean, what was the most fun part of the 16 season? It was the HBK line. None of those guys were Crosby, Malkin, Letang. Letang didn't even play in the 17 playoffs, and we won. So we see that it does take a whole team, but the right leaders. I think Rust and Gensel can be those right leaders if they get the right team around them.
I actually don't necessarily disagree with Tyler Kennedy on this one.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that Brian Rust and Jake Gensel on their own, as the top two players on the team, would be a good enough top duo to lead a Penguins team to a Stanley Cup championship. To the playoffs is one thing. We've seen teams that don't necessarily have the forward stars be carried to the postseason by a goaltender, and that could happen in the Pittsburgh Penguins instance after Crosby and Malkin have departed. But I don't see these two specifically for a couple reasons. One, we always mention that Gensel is much better than people give him credit for, that he's not just carried by Sidney Crosby, but he's not at that level, and neither is Brian Rust. And another reason that I kind of agree with him is because by the time Crosby and Malkin are done, let's say Crosby's done in 3 years, which is very early because Crosby said he wants to play more, but that's how long he has left on his contract. If it's just 3 years, Brian Rust will be 33.
Yeah.
Jake Gensel will be 30 or 31. You're already into the latter stages of their careers, and you're going to be counting on them to go out there and be the superstars. I don't necessarily agree with that because it's already hard enough. You're talking about Malkin, Crosby, and Letang all over the age of 35 doing what they're doing because they're Penguins Hall of Famers, without a doubt. Two of them are without a doubt NHL Hockey Hall of Famers. So that's the reason I think that a lot of people are like, yeah, when they're gone, we have Gensel and Rust are going to be closer to the ends of their careers. So I agree with him on that aspect. And also, if you look at a team that is trying to be led by preliminarily wingers and they don't have that star center, you're looking at the Minnesota Wild and what they have been for the past 5 seasons. Have they been anywhere close to the Stanley Cup? No, they haven't been out of the first round. Now, the thing is, with all things considered, if the Penguins don't bring in another stud winger or a stud center, the Penguins are going to be worse off than the Minnesota Wild. Yeah. Because the Minnesota Wild are much deeper as a team, even though they don't have that star center. They're much deeper as a team than the Pittsburgh Penguins are set up to be. Right. So you're looking at a fate of basically not making the playoffs, but being on the bubble of the playoffs if your leaders are Rust and Gensel, in my opinion. Not to throw shade at them. I think they are top tier secondary pieces. But I don't think them being the number 1 and number 2 guys on the Pittsburgh Penguins following the Crosby, Malkin, Letang era will lead to that much success. So in that aspect, I agree with Tyler Kennedy, but I don't think it was meant by him to be putting shade on any of these two guys. I think it's just the fact that if they're the guys for your team, you have some issues.
Yeah, I think more or less that's what he was going by. I wasn't even bringing like their skill into the equation, and I knew that with this thought that none of it would be for long term because they're going to be older too. Like we mentioned, Russ is already in his 30s, so yeah. Let's say post all 3 of those guys leaving, Russ is bare minimum 36. So yeah, that can get a little horrifying. Sure, it wouldn't be the longest of terms. Never I said the captaincy thing, but like it would be just a quick carryover until someone else is there. That's why I said unless they pick someone up along the way. 6 years is a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, whole careers are going to start and end in 6 years in all 4 major sports. So,
Yeah.
frightening thought. So, and Gensel, I think he'll where he is a little younger, he will also still be aged because this is bare minimum 6 years. We don't know how much longer Crosby really has. He's the one that's going to carry this team and be the leader of this team until he's gone. So who knows what the team looks like in 6 years? But if it is those two that stick around, whereas I think they will be good leaders. I don't know if they'll be good enough players and winners per se. So I agree and disagree with them. I think that they can as leaders, maybe not so much as players skill wise, because they'll just be older and past the prime.
Yeah, they'd be great second or third liners in 6 years' times.
Yeah.
Like, and if they're better than that, then they're something special because you don't see it very often where players, especially like Brian Rust, like Jake Gensel, I think is on a different level. I think he has shown that he's on a different level than Brian Rust. But if Brian Rust is still good in year 5 of this contract, then you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to really change everybody's opinions on Ron Hextall.
Yeah.
I think people right now are 50-50 on him. But if Rust in year 5 of this contract, and if everything else goes well, of course, because he signed plenty of long-term deals, Ricard Raquel and obviously Letang and Malkin. But if Rust works out and that was their number one priority, then it just makes them look much better. But I think when you look at this 5 years down the road, you're going to be seeing the latter stages, and you're not going to see 40-goal Jake Gensel. You're not going to see 30-goal Brian Rust. They might be really good veteran pieces at that point, but I don't think they're the pieces that are going to carry a team specifically the whole way to a Stanley Cup championship. So thank you to Tyler Kennedy for feeding us that entire segment on a 2-minute video, but that's the type of thing we like to do, especially when the season has yet to begin. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to finish this episode off with our weekly Pens poll. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by InsideThePenguins.com. Our weekly Pens poll looking at some of the newest acquired Pittsburgh Penguins to ask which newcomer besides Jeff Petrie, because I think we all expect Petrie to make a big impact on the Pittsburgh Penguins next season, but which newcomer besides Petrie will make the biggest impact on the 2022-23 season for the Pittsburgh Penguins? Over 50% of voters believe it'll be Jan Rutta, 56% to be exact. He was far and away the number one choice in this poll. Ty Smith gets second with 27% of the vote. Ryan Poehling gets 12%, and 5% actually did go out and vote for Drake Caggiula, thinking that he'll make an impact on the Pittsburgh Penguins' bottom 6. Horwat, who did you vote for in this poll?
Man, I think I switched my vote 3 times. Because Jan Rutta is a great answer there, because we know he's definitely going to be in the lineup for one. He's definitely going to probably take the Chad Ruhwedel position and maybe do it a little bit better than Chad Ruhwedel. We'll see where everything goes with that. Ty Smith, we're genuinely not sure at the moment if he is going to be in the starting lineup to start the season. Will he work his way in? Most likely. We don't know what kind of difference he can make if he is not starting day one. I mean, he's got that whole defensive logjam to fight through. Ryan Poehling is an interesting one because he's the only forward that makes a difference here. Caggiula, as much as I want to see him do something, I just don't know if he will anymore. So
he might be the 16th forward at this point.
Yeah, so I'm backing out of that one. Whereas Ryan Poehling is, at least at the moment, still slated to be in the starting lineup. So it's an interesting thing if he is able to pull through and become maybe the Danton Heinen of this year. With Danton Heinen still on his team, maybe even on his line. If he's able to have that sort of play, then yeah, I think he would win this poll. But at the moment, I mean, all 3 of those guys can do it. All 3 of those guys can have that new impact on this team. I would have to lay my flag. If I had to lay my flag into one, you know what? Forget his name now. Ty Smith, just because it's a reclamation project, sort of, but he's also still considered a prospect by some.
Mhm.
And he's got a future ahead of him. So if he's able to turn a career around, despite it being like his second or third season,
Mhm.
yeah, then he's got a hell of a future ahead of him, and I'm glad he's here for it.
Yeah. And I know we can't change the question because it's not fair because the voters didn't get a chance to vote on the changed question. But if the question was who's going to make the biggest impact on the Penguins moving forward, I might vote Ty Smith, but not just this season because, like you mentioned, Ty Smith's still considered by many, including the Athletic, to be a prospect for the Penguins because he's 22 years old.
Yeah,
And he has proven already 2 years under his belt in the NHL, 22 years old, offensive defenseman. If he can bring that defensive part of his game around a little bit more than he was able to before, then he's going to be a really good piece for the Pittsburgh Penguins for many years to come. But I think when I vote for this, and the safer pick is Jan Ruda because, like you
mhm,
mentioned, he is a surefire pick to be in the lineup on night one and every single game in which he is healthy to play in. He's going to play in the most games. He's going to make an impact defensively for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But I do think if you're going to make a bolder statement, I think the ceiling is higher when it comes to impact for Ty Smith. I agree. But I think the floor is much higher for Jan Ruda. So I voted for Jan Ruda in this one, but also I think a lot of people are forgetting about Ryan Paling because he got half as many votes as Ty Smith, and he is definitely much more likely to
yeah,
be on that roster on opening night. Ty Smith might be in Wilkes-Barre, but
yeah.
I also understand where you're saying a offensive defenseman might be a bigger impact player than a fourth line winger. And I agree with that in instances. But also, I think it's very interesting to see that Ryan Paling, who I sometimes forget was acquired in that Jeff Petrie trade, is going to be a player for this team. Like he's going to see a lot of playing time at the NHL level. So it'll be interesting. And Drake Caggiula, I think we both agree that the only reason he's in here is because he's the only other new Penguin to really be brought in this offseason.
You didn't want to toss Josh Archibald into this. That's all.
No, because he's not a new Penguin. He's a returning Penguin.
Oh, okay.
That was my thought process on it. So yeah, no, Drake Caggiula, and he might end up being a guy that plays 15 to 20 games. He might end up being a guy that scores 4, maybe 5 goals for the Penguins if he gets that 20 game sample size. But I just don't think the impact's going to be there. And I think at the end of the season, if Drake Caggiula is in your playoff roster, if the Penguins do make the postseason, then you're going to be in some issues because at that point, you're going to have several players that are injured enough to not play in the postseason. That's not a good sign for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So I was between Ruda and Smith, but like I said, I'm going with Ruda because I believe the floor is higher on Ruda this season. But I do agree that the ceiling is higher on Ty Smith going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and the ceiling's definitely higher. The floor is higher for John Ruda, though. You're totally correct.
Mhm.
That's why I changed my answer like 3 times. I don't remember who I actually voted for on the thing, so those numbers are fudged for all we know. But yeah, it could be any of them, and it's good that this is a good problem to have too. The
Mhm.
fact that we think it's possible 3 guys can make a difference for this team.
Yeah.
That's a good start because we also know there's a few more that aren't even listed here that we think can make a difference for this team.
Mhm.
Whether they are positive or negative in the cases of Kasperi Kapanen and maybe Jason Zucker, it's still the fact that if let's say those guys turn their stuff around, and let's say all 3 of these people that we were talking about have decent to good seasons,
Mhm.
well, then all of a sudden we have a powerhouse of a team. I'm not saying we don't now, but it's at a different level.
Mhm.
So I'm intrigued to see what all 3 of them can do.
Mhm.
Uh, I just don't even remember who I picked at the time. But I'll hold on to Ty Smith for now because I like the future aspect he brings with him.
Mhm. I think what's really pertinent to what you just said is if these guys all pan out, then
Yep.
the Penguins are in a good spot because I think a lot of people's tentativeness with the Pittsburgh Penguins heading into the season is they do have question marks. And a lot of these guys are question marks. Like, is Jeff Petrie going to bounce back? That's a question mark. Is Jan Ruda? I think he's less of a question mark because people know exactly what he is. He's a defensive defenseman that can play on either side of the puck. But how does he fit into this defense? We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen him on the ice in Penguins gear at all. So that is still a question mark. Ty Smith and Ryan Paling are huge questions. If Ty Smith can come in and be rookie year Ty Smith and maybe even get put with a guy like Jan Ruda and find success, that's a huge bonus for the Pittsburgh Penguins based on what people are looking at for them now on their blue line. And the same thing with Ryan Paling. If he comes in and shows what his potential is and can reach what his potential is, then that's a fantastic scoring bottom 6 forward that can play the net front that is a big body that is, I wouldn't say necessarily that physical, but he's a big bodied guy that has some really talented abilities and some goal scoring abilities. So if he reaches his potential, that's a great piece in the bottom six for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And it just changes the outlook on the season for the team entirely.
Good. Really good. Everyone's got their opportunities this year.
Yeah. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. We will be back Thursday and eventually, potentially, get into that segment that we have been now pushing off for 5-6 episodes. It's scheduled to be on Thursday, but we said the same thing about today. We'll see if any news happens between now and then. And if it does, we will have it covered here on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. But that's going to do it for this one. Enjoy the remainder of your Labor Day and enjoy the week, Pens fans. We'll see you guys later.